The rain hit the windows of the San Francisco Police Department's interrogation room with the kind of violence that made people think about endings. It was October 14th, a Tuesday afternoon that felt like the world had already decided to close its eyes and give up. Detective Marcus Brennan sat across from Dr. Victoria Reeves, watching her manicured fingers trace invisible patterns on the metal table between them. She wore a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than his monthly salary, and her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked like it hurt. But her face was calm, too calm for someone whose patient had just died. "Tell me again about Emma Hartley," Marcus said, his voice flat, tired. He'd been doing this job for 23 years, and he'd learned that sometimes the truth hid in repetition. Sometimes people changed their stories the second or third time around, added details they shouldn't know, removed facts they'd been too eager to share. Victoria inhaled slowly, deliberately, like she was counting to 5 in her head before speaking. A therapist's trick. Marcus had seen it before. "Emma was troubled," Victoria began, and her voice had that professional smoothness that made Marcus's jaw tighten. "She came to me 6 months ago, suffering from severe anxiety and what I identified as borderline personality disorder with obsessive attachment patterns." Marcus wrote that down, even though he'd heard it the first time. "Emma Hartley, 28 years old, found dead in her apartment 3 days ago. Pills, a lot of them. The medical examiner called it suicide before the body was even cold. She became fixated on me," Victoria continued, and now there was something in her voice, something Marcus couldn't name but could feel, like the temperature in the room had dropped 2 degrees. It's not uncommon in therapeutic relationships, especially with borderline patients. They idealize their therapist, create fantasies of connection that don't exist. "I tried to establish boundaries, detective. I really did. But Emma ... she wouldn't accept them." Marcus looked up from his notepad. "What kind of fantasies?" Victoria's lips pressed together, thin and tight. "She believed we were friends. More than friends, actually. She would send me gifts, show up at my office outside of our scheduled sessions, call me at all hours. I had to be very firm with her about professional limits. And how did she react to that firmness? Badly." Victoria's hands were still now, folded neatly on the table. "She would cry, accuse me of abandoning her, threaten to hurt herself if I didn't give her more time, more attention. It's classic borderline behavior, detective. The splitting, the intense fear of abandonment, the manipulation." The way she said manipulation made Marcus feel sick, like the word tasted good in her mouth. "So you think she killed herself because you set boundaries?" Marcus asked, and he heard the edge in his own voice. He didn't like this woman. Didn't like how clean her office probably was. Didn't like how she talked about a dead girl like Emma was a case study and not a human being who'd swallowed enough pills to stop her heart. "I think Emma killed herself because she was mentally ill." Detective Brennan. Victoria's eyes met his, and they were the color of winter. "I did everything I could to help her, but sometimes you can't save people from themselves. If you've ever felt like someone was telling you a truth that felt like a lie, like the words were right but the music was wrong, then you know what Marcus felt in that moment." Subscribe to our channel and hit that like button, because this story is about to show you how the smallest details can reveal the darkest secrets. Now back to that interrogation room. Marcus was about to close his notepad, about to sign off on this case as another tragic suicide, another young woman who couldn't handle the weight of her own mind. He was about to let Dr. Victoria Reeves walk out of that room and back to her pristine office in Pacific Heights, back to her other patients, back to her life. But then the door opened. Dr. Arthur Vance stepped inside, and the air changed. Arthur was 52 years old, tall and leaner in a way that suggested he forgot to eat unless someone reminded him. He wore a dark grey suit that looked like it had been expensive once, maybe 10 years ago, and his eyes were the kind that made people confess things they'd never told anyone. Not because he was intimidating, because he saw things. "Detective Brennan," Arthur said, nodding once. "Thank you for allowing me to consult on this case." Marcus had called Arthur because something about Emma Hartley's death bothered him. The apartment was too clean. The note was too neat. The pills were arranged in a perfect line on the nightstand like someone had staged it. Arthur specialized in what he called behavioral analysis, what most people called reading minds. Though Arthur hated that phrase. He didn't read minds, he read bodies. And bodies, Arthur always said, never lied. Doctors. "Reeves was just telling me about her patient," Marcus said, gesturing to the woman across the table. "Emma Hartley." Arthur sat down slowly, his movements careful and measured. He didn't look at Victoria yet. Instead, he pulled out a small leather journal and a pen, opened to a blank page, and wrote the date in the corner. Then, and only then, did he lift his eyes to meet Victoria's. "Dr. Reeves," he said quietly, "would you mind repeating what you just told Detective Brennan about your professional relationship with Emma?" Victoria's smile was thin, professional. Of course. She settled back in her chair, and Arthur watched. He watched everything. "Emma Hartley was my patient for approximately 6 months. She suffered from severe anxiety and borderline personality disorder with obsessive attachment patterns. Over time, she developed an unhealthy fixation on me, believing we had a personal relationship that extended beyond the therapeutic context." Arthur's pen didn't move, his face didn't change, but inside his mind, 1,000 calculations were happening at once, faster than thought, faster than breath. He watched Victoria's pupils as she said the word fixation. They dilated, not with fear or sadness, but with something else, satisfaction, a micro-expression that lasted less than half a second, but it was there. The corners of her mouth turned up, barely, in what behavioral scientists called duping delight, the involuntary pleasure people feel when they're getting away with a lie. When Victoria said professional relationship, her left hand rose unconsciously to touch the side of her neck, fingers pressing against the carotid artery, a self-soothing gesture, but also a sign of anxiety, guilt. When she mentioned establishing boundaries, her eyes broke contact with Arthur's for exactly 1.3 seconds, darting to the left, the direction people's eyes move when they're constructing a fiction rather than remembering the truth. And when she said Emma wouldn't accept those boundaries, Victoria's breathing changed, became shallower. Her chest rose and fell faster, and a faint flush appeared at the base of her throat. 10 seconds. That's how long Arthur needed to see the whole truth. He set his pen down carefully on the table, and the small click of metal and metal sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You're lying," Arthur said. The words dropped into the space between them like stones into still water. Victoria's face froze, not with shock, but with the terrible stillness of someone who's just realized they've been caught. "Excuse me," her voice was ice. "I'm a licensed therapist with 15 years of experience, Dr. Vance. I don't appreciate when you said Emma had a fixation on you." Arthur interrupted, his voice calm, clinical. "Your pupils dilated and the corners of your mouth rose in what we call duping delight, a micro-expression associated with the pleasure of successful deception. When you mentioned establishing professional boundaries, you touched your neck in a self-soothing gesture that indicates anxiety and guilt. And when you claimed Emma wouldn't accept those boundaries, your eyes moved to the left, which suggests construction of a false memory rather than retrieval of a real one." Victoria's face had gone white. That's pseudoscience. Reading body language isn't. It's not pseudoscience," Arthur said quietly. "It's observation. and your body just told me everything your mouth was trying to hide. Marcus Brennan leaned forward, his earlier exhaustion gone, replaced by something sharp and alert. What are you saying, Arthur? Arthur's eyes never left Victoria's face. I'm saying that Dr. Reeves didn't have a professional relationship with Emma Hartley. She had something else, something that involved manipulation, control, and the systematic destruction of a vulnerable woman's psychological well-being. That's absurd, Victoria started, but Arthur raised one hand, and somehow that gentle gesture carried more authority than any shout could. Detective Brennan, Arthur said, still watching Victoria, did Emma Hartley leave any personal effects? A journal, perhaps? Diary entries? Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, we found a journal in her apartment. Haven't had time to read through it all yet. Just the suicide note. I'd like to see that journal, Arthur said. Now, the rain was getting louder. Or maybe that was just Victoria's heartbeat, hammering so hard in her chest that she could feel it in her throat, taste it on her tongue like copper and fear. She watched Detective Brennan leave the room, watched the door close behind him, and then it was just her and Arthur in that small space, with the fluorescent lights humming overhead like angry insects. You don't know anything, Victoria said, and her voice was different now, stripped of its professional polish, raw. You saw some facial expressions and you think you know what happened. You think you understand. Arthur's expression was patient, sad. I think you hurt her, he said quietly. I think you hurt Emma Hartley in ways that don't leave bruises. I think you took a young woman who came to you for help, who trusted you, and you used that trust to make yourself feel powerful. And when she started to realize what you were doing, when she started to pull away, you couldn't allow that. So you destroyed her. Victoria laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove it, Arthur said. Emma already did. The door opened again. Marcus came back carrying a black leather journal, worn at the edges, the kind you could buy at any bookstore. He handed it to Arthur, and Arthur opened it slowly, carefully, like he was handling something sacred, because he was. This was Emma's voice, her truth. He flipped through the pages, scanning dates, and then he stopped. October 2nd, 12 days before Emma died. Arthur began to read aloud, and his voice filled the room with words that Emma would never speak again. I don't understand what's happening to me. I went to Victoria because I was anxious, because I couldn't sleep, because I thought I was going crazy. And for the first few weeks, it was good. She made me feel special, like I was the only patient who mattered. She'll text me between sessions, just to check in. She'll tell me things about her life, her marriage, her struggles. It felt like friendship. It felt real. But then something changed. She started canceling sessions last minute. When I'd text her, she wouldn't respond for days. And when I finally saw her again, she'd act cold, distant, like I was bothering her. When I asked if I'd done something wrong, she'd say I was being too needy, that I needed to learn to function without constant validation. It felt like emotional whiplash. One week, she'd make me feel like the most important person in the world. The next week, I was invisible. I started to feel crazy, started to wonder if I'd imagined the friendship, the connection. She told me I had borderline personality disorder, said my intense emotions and fear of abandonment were symptoms of my illness. But I never felt this way before I met her. Before her, I was just anxious. Now I feel like I'm drowning. Arthur looked up from the journal. Victoria's face was a mask now, empty of expression, but her hands were shaking, trembling so badly that she had to press them flat against the table to make them stop. That's called intermittent reinforcement, Arthur said quietly. It's a psychological manipulation technique. You offer connection and warmth, then withdraw it unpredictably. It creates a trauma bond. The victim becomes addicted to the moments of warmth because they're so rare, so unpredictable. It's the same principle behind gambling addiction, behind abusive relationships. And you did it deliberately. I was trying to teach her independence, Victoria started, but her voice cracked on the last word. Arthur shook his head. No. You were feeding your own ego, making yourself feel powerful by controlling how much pain and pleasure someone else experienced. And when Emma started to see through it, when she started to question you, you labeled her as mentally ill, gaslit her into believing her own perceptions were symptoms of disorder rather than accurate observations of your abuse. He flipped forward in the journal. October 10th, 4 days before Emma died. I told Victoria today that I didn't want to continue therapy with her, that I needed to find someone else. She smiled at me, this cold, satisfied smile, and said, "Of course, Emma, I think that's wise. You're clearly not capable of the kind of therapeutic work we do here. Some people just aren't strong enough." When I left her office, I felt like I was nothing, like everything inside me was hollow. I don't know if I can do this anymore. I don't know if I want to. The silence in the room was suffocating. Marcus Brennan looked at Victoria like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, and what he saw made him feel sick. "You told her she wasn't strong enough," Arthur said, and there was something in his voice now. Not anger, something worse. Grief. You knew she was suicidal. You knew she was barely holding on, and your final act was to confirm her deepest fear, that she was weak, that she didn't matter. You killed her, Dr. Reeves. Maybe not with pills, but you killed her. Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a scream. "I want a lawyer," she said, and her voice was shaking. "I want a lawyer now." "Sit down," Marcus said, and his voice was hard as stone. "We're not done here." But Arthur raised his hand again, that same gentle gesture. "It's all right, detective. Let her call her lawyer. She's going to need one." He closed Emma's journal carefully, as if tucking a child into bed, and stood. At the door, he paused and looked back at Victoria. She was still standing, her perfect posture finally crumbling, her shoulders curving inward like she was trying to disappear into herself. "You thought you were untouchable," Arthur said quietly. "You thought your credentials, your reputation, your position would protect you. But you forgot something, Dr. Reeves. Bodies don't lie. And Emma's body, her words, her truth, just told us everything we needed to know." He walked out and the door closed behind him with a sound like finality. In the hallway, Marcus caught up with him. "Arthur, wait. What happens now? Can we even charge her with anything?" She didn't. She didn't technically kill Emma." Arthur stopped walking. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting shadows that made his face look older, wearier. "Contact the California Board of Psychology," he said, "and start looking into Victoria's other patients. Women like her, narcissists who use their position to feed their need for control. They don't stop at one victim. There will be others." Marcus nodded slowly, pulling out his phone. As Arthur walked toward the exit, toward the rain and the grey October afternoon beyond the glass doors, he thought about Emma Hartley, 28 years old, dead because she'd trusted the wrong person. Dead because someone who was supposed to help her had decided instead to destroy her. The truth was this: sometimes the people we trust to save us are the ones who hurt us most. Sometimes the hand we reach for in the darkness is the one that pushes us further down. And sometimes justice comes too late to save the ones who needed it, but it still comes. Over the next 72 hours, Detective Marcus Brennan's world became a map of pain. He sat in his cramped office at the SFPD headquarters, with file folders stacked so high on his desk they blocked the weak autumn sunlight struggling through the window. Each folder was a woman. Each woman was a story, and every single story led back to Dr. Victoria Reeves. Arthur had been right. There were others. The first name Marcus found was Jennifer Cole, 32, graphic designer, admitted to a psychiatric hospital 9 months ago, after what her family called a complete breakdown. Marcus drove to Oakland on a Wednesday morning when the fog was so thick he could barely see the road ahead. Jennifer's apartment was small, but filled with light paintings on the walls, plants on every surface, a life carefully rebuilt from ruins. She answered the door with caution in her eyes, the kind of careful wariness that people develop when trust has been weaponized against them. "You said this was about Dr. Reeves?" Jennifer asked, and Marcus heard the tremor in her voice. "Not fear, something worse. Recognition." "I need to know about your therapy sessions with her," Marcus said gently, standing in her doorway like he was afraid to push too hard, afraid she might shatter. "A woman died, Jennifer, Emma Hartley, and I think Victoria had something to do with it." Jennifer's face went pale. She stepped back, wordless, and opened the door wider. Marcus walked into her living room, sat on a sage-green couch, and listened as Jennifer told him her story. "It started so well," Jennifer said, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. "I went to her because I was going through a divorce. My husband had cheated, and I felt like I was falling apart. Victoria made me feel seen. She'd tell me I was special, that I had so much potential, that my ex-husband was an idiot for letting me go. She'd hug me at the end of sessions. She gave me her personal cell number, told me to call anytime." Marcus wrote this down, his handwriting getting messier with each word. He'd heard this before, in Emma's journal, the same pattern. "But then," Jennifer continued, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper, "she started pulling away, cancelling sessions, not returning my calls. And when I finally got her on the phone, she'd say things like, 'Jennifer, you're being clingy. This is exactly why your husband left you. You suffocate people.' She diagnosed me with dependent personality disorder, made me believe that my need for connection was pathological." "What happened next?" Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know, didn't want to hear what he already suspected. Jennifer's hands shook so badly that tea sloshed over the rim of her mug, but she didn't seem to notice. "I tried to kill myself," she said flatly. "Pills, same as Emma, but my sister found me in time. I spent 3 weeks in a psychiatric hospital, and the doctors there, the real doctors, they told me I didn't have dependent personality disorder. They told me I'd been emotionally abused, that what Victoria did to me was a form of psychological torture called narcissistic abuse." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Did you ever report her? File a complaint with the licensing board?" Jennifer laughed, and it was the saddest sound Marcus had ever heard. "I tried, but Victoria had documentation. Notes from our sessions describing my erratic behavior, my inappropriate attachment, my inability to respect boundaries. She made herself look like the victim of my obsession, and I looked like a crazy ex-patient with an axe to grind. That was the genius of it," Marcus realized. Victoria had created a paper trail that painted her victims as unstable, obsessive, delusional. If they came forward, who would believe them? A respected therapist with 15 years of experience, or a mentally ill patient with documented boundary issues? It was perfect, and it was monstrous. Marcus found the second victim that same afternoon. Sophia Martinez, 25, barista at a coffee shop in the Mission District, still seeing a new therapist twice a week to deal with what she called Victoria trauma. She told Marcus the same story: initial warmth, gradual withdrawal, gaslighting, diagnosis of mental illness, and final abandonment. Sophia hadn't tried to kill herself, but she'd thought about it every single day for 6 months. The third victim was Rebecca Chun, 41, high school teacher, who'd stopped going to therapy altogether after Victoria. "I can't trust anyone anymore," Rebecca told Marcus over the phone, her voice hollow. "Every time I think about opening up to someone, I hear Victoria's voice in my head telling me I'm too much, too needy, too broken to fix. 4 victims. 4 women whose lives Victoria Reeves had systematically dismantled under the guise of professional care, and one of them hadn't survived. By Friday, Marcus had enough evidence to bring to the California Board of Psychology. He had journals, emails, text messages showing the pattern of intermittent reinforcement and emotional manipulation. He had psychiatric evaluations from other doctors contradicting Victoria's diagnosis. He had testimony from 4 women willing to go on record despite their fear, despite the shame they'd been taught to feel. Arthur met him at a small diner near the police station, the kind of place where the coffee was terrible but strong and the waitresses knew everyone by name. Marcus slid the compiled evidence across the table, and Arthur read through it slowly, his face growing darker with each page. "This is textbook narcissistic abuse," Arthur said finally, closing the last folder. "She targets vulnerable women, love bombs them with attention and validation, then systematically withdraws that approval to create dependency. When they react to the pain she's causing, when they get angry or desperate or sad, she pathologizes their reactions, tells them their normal emotional responses to abnormal treatment are symptoms of mental illness." "Why?" Marcus asked, and he heard the rawness in his own voice. "Why would someone do this? She's a therapist. She's supposed to help people." Arthur looked out the window at the San Francisco street, beyond people walking past in coats and scarves, carrying coffee cups and shopping bags, living their small, ordinary lives. "Because it makes her feel powerful," he said quietly. "Narcissists like Victoria don't see other people as fully human. They see them as sources of what we call narcissistic supply: attention, admiration, control. When you have complete power over someone's emotional state, when you can make them feel worthless or special with just a word or a look, that's the ultimate high for someone like her." Marcus thought about Emma Hartley, 28 years old, dead on her bathroom floor, pills scattered around her like fallen stars. "She killed Emma," he said. "Maybe not legally, but morally. She killed her." "Yes," Arthur agreed. "And she would have killed more if you hadn't stopped her." California Board of Psychology moved faster than Marcus expected. Within a week, they'd opened a formal investigation into Dr. Victoria Reeves. Within 2 weeks, they'd suspended her license, pending a full ethics hearing. And within 3 weeks, the story had leaked to the press. Marcus watched the news coverage from his living room, a beer growing warm in his hand. The anchor was a polished woman with perfect hair, and she spoke in that measured tone that television people used when discussing tragedies. Tonight, disturbing allegations against a prominent San Francisco therapist. 4 women have come forward, claiming Dr. Victoria Reeves engaged in psychological abuse disguised as treatment. One of those women, Emma Hartley, took her own life last month. Our reporter Sarah Chun has more. The camera cut to a younger woman standing outside Victoria's office building in Pacific Heights. "Behind me is the practice where Dr. Victoria Reeves saw patients for over 15 years, Sarah said, and the wind caught her dark hair, blowing it across her face. "Now, that practice is closed, and Dr. Reeves herself is under investigation for what some experts are calling one of the most egregious cases of therapeutic abuse in California history." The screen filled with photos: Gemma, Jennifer, Sophia, Rebecca, 4 faces, 4 women who'd trusted the wrong person. The reporter's voice continued. "According to court documents, Dr. Reeves allegedly used a manipulation tactic called intermittent reinforcement to create emotional dependency in her patients, then withdrew support when they became attached, causing severe psychological harm." Marcus turned off the television. He didn't need to hear more. He'd lived this case for 3 weeks now, had barely slept, had drunk too much coffee and eaten too little food, but it was worth it. Every sleepless hour was worth it if it meant Victoria couldn't hurt anyone else. His phone rang. "Arthur, turn on channel 7, Arthur said without preamble. Marcus switched channels. A press conference. And there, standing behind a podium with a dozen microphones pointed at her face, was Victoria Reeves. She looked different, smaller somehow. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a navy blue suit instead of her usual designer clothes. No makeup, red eyes, the performance of remorse. "I want to apologize," Victoria said, and her voice cracked, real tears on her cheeks. Marcus felt sick. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was helping. I thought I was doing good work, but I've realized that I crossed boundaries, that I allowed my own needs, my own loneliness, my own struggles, to affect my professional judgment. I'm deeply sorry to Emmy Hartley's family, to all the women I hurt. I'm seeking help myself now. I'm in therapy. I'm learning." Marcus turned it off again. "Performance," he said into the phone. "Agreed," Arthur replied. "She's not sorry she did it. She's sorry she got caught. Notice how she framed it. I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought I was helping." She is still positioning herself as the victim of her own good intentions, still deflecting responsibility. "Will it work?" Marcus asked. The apology, the tears, the "I'm getting help" routine. Arthur was quiet for a moment. "Maybe with the public. People want to believe in redemption. But the ethics board? No. They've seen the evidence. They know what she is." The formal ethics hearing took place 6 weeks after Emma's death. Marcus sat in the back row of the hearing room, watching Victoria face a panel of 5 psychologists who would decide her professional fate. Arthur was there too, called as an expert witness on psychological manipulation and deceptive behavior. The hearing lasted 3 days. Victoria's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man with silver hair, argued that his client had made errors in judgment, but hadn't acted maliciously, that the women who'd come forward were unreliable witnesses due to their documented mental health issues, that this was a witch hunt fueled by tabloid journalism and anti-therapist bias. But then Arthur took the stand. Dr. Vance, the board chairwoman, said, a severe-looking woman in her 60s with glasses that made her eyes look enormous. "You've reviewed Dr. Reeves's case files, correct?" "I have," Arthur said calmly. "And what did you find?" Arthur opened a folder, but Marcus noticed he didn't look at it. He'd memorized everything. "I found a consistent pattern across multiple patients spanning several years. Dr. Reeves would identify vulnerable women, usually those dealing with divorce, loss, trauma, and begin treatment with what appears to be exceptional care, frequent contact, personal disclosure, physical affection in the form of hugs, validation, special treatment." Victoria's lawyer stood. "Objection. Many therapists form strong therapeutic alliances with their patients." "This wasn't a therapeutic alliance," Arthur interrupted, and his voice carried absolute certainty. "This was grooming. Dr. Reeves deliberately created emotional dependency by offering connection and then weaponizing that dependency by withdrawing unpredictably. The pattern is identical across 4 documented cases, possibly more. When patients reacted to this treatment with distress, as any human being would, she pathologized their reactions, diagnosed them with personality disorders they didn't have, documented their inappropriate attachment and boundary violations. She created a paper trail that made her victims look unstable while protecting herself from accountability. The room was silent. Even Victoria's lawyer had sat down. "Furthermore," Arthur continued, "when patients attempted to terminate treatment or confront Dr. Reeves about her behavior, she engaged in what's called narcissistic rage. She punished them with coldness, with final statements designed to confirm their deepest insecurities. In Emma Hartley's case, the last words Dr. Reeves spoke to her were, "You're not strong enough." 4 days later, Emma was dead. The chairwoman's face was grim. "Dr. Vance, in your professional opinion, was Dr. Reeves aware that her behavior was harmful?" Arthur met Victoria's eyes across the room. She was staring at him with something that might have been hatred or might have been fear. "Yes," Arthur said quietly. She knew. Narcissists always know. They just don't care. The board deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Dr. Victoria Reeves was permanently stripped of her license to practice psychology in the state of California. She was ordered to pay restitution to her victims. And most significantly, the board referred her case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges, specifically involuntary manslaughter in the death of Emma Hartley. Marcus stood outside the hearing room afterward, watching Victoria leave through a side exit. She was flanked by her lawyer and her husband, a quiet man Marcus had never seen before, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 6 weeks. Victoria's face was blank now. No tears, no performance, just emptiness. "Do you think she feels anything?" Marcus asked Arthur, who stood beside him. "Guilt? Shame? Remorse?" Arthur watched Victoria disappear around a corner. "I think she feels sorry for herself," he said. "I think she feels angry that she got caught, but genuine remorse for the pain she caused. No, people like Victoria can't feel that. They lack the fundamental capacity for empathy that would make remorse possible." "That's terrifying," Marcus said. "Yes," Arthur agreed. "It is." The civil lawsuits came next. Jennifer Carl, Sophia Martinez, and Rebecca Chone all filed suit against Victoria for emotional damages, psychological abuse, and malpractice. Emma's mother, Catherine Hartley, filed a wrongful death suit. The cases would take years to resolve, Marcus knew, but at least they were moving forward. At least there would be some measure of justice. On a cold morning in December, Marcus stood at the edge of Land's End in San Francisco, watching Catherine Hartley place flowers at a small memorial she'd created for her daughter. It wasn't official, just a wooden cross planted in the earth near the cliff's edge, with Emma's name carved into the wood and photographs attached with weather-resistant laminate. Emma smiling, Emma as a child, Emma on her college graduation day. Catherine was 63, with grey hair cut short and lines on her face that grief had deepened. She knelt in the wet grass, arranging white lilies around the cross, and Marcus could hear her crying, even over the sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks below. Arthur stood slightly apart, hands in his coat pockets, his face turned toward the grey horizon. Marcus joined him. "Her mother blames herself," Marcus said quietly. "She told me she should have known Emma was struggling, should have seen the signs. It's not her fault," Arthur said. "Victoria was very good at hiding what she was doing. She had years of practice, manipulating people, years of creating false narratives that protected her image. Catherine couldn't have known. I just wish we'd figured it out sooner," Marcus said, and he felt the weight of those words in his chest. "Before Emma, double quotes, I know." Arthur's voice was soft, sad. "But we can't save everyone, Marcus. Sometimes justice comes too late to rescue the ones who needed it most. All we can do is make sure it comes eventually, make sure the truth gets told, even if it can't undo the damage." Catherine stood up slowly, her knees stiff from kneeling. She turned and saw Marcus and Arthur standing there. For a moment Marcus thought she might be angry, might resent their presence at this private moment of grief. But instead, she walked toward them, and when she reached them, she took both of their hands. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was hoarse from crying. "Thank you for believing Emma, for proving she wasn't crazy, that it wasn't her fault." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I'm sorry we couldn't save her," he said. Catherine shook her head. You gave her truth, she said. You made sure the world knows what really happened. That's something. That's everything. She walked away slowly, back toward the parking lot, leaving Marcus and Arthur alone with Emma's memorial and the endless grey ocean beyond. 10 seconds, Marcus said after a long silence. That's all it took you to see through Victoria. 10 seconds of watching her lie. Bodies don't lie, Arthur said again. People can control their words. They can rehearse their stories, practice their tears. But bodies betray truth in microseconds, in the dilation of pupils, the twitch of a smile, the unconscious touch of a hand to the throat. You just have to know how to look. I wish everyone knew how to look, Marcus said. So do I. They stood there until the light started to fade, until the fog rolled in from the ocean and swallowed the memorial in white silence. Then they walked back to their cars, back to their lives, carrying the weight of one saved truth and one life lost. 3 months later, Victoria Reeves was indicted on charges of involuntary manslaughter. The district attorney argued that her psychological abuse had been a direct cause of Emma's suicide, that her deliberate manipulation and final cruel abandonment had created an imminent danger to Emma's life. The case would become a landmark precedent for holding therapists criminally accountable for abuse disguised as treatment. Victoria would eventually settle the civil suits, paying out over $2 million in damages. Her career was over, her reputation destroyed. Her face became synonymous with betrayal of trust, with the dark side of therapeutic power. But Emma Hartley was still dead. That was the truth Marcus came back to, again and again, in the months and years that followed. Justice had been served, Victoria had been stopped, other women had been spared. But Emma, 28 years old, with her whole life ahead of her, was gone. Sometimes justice comes too late. Sometimes the people we trust to heal us are the ones who break us beyond repair. Sometimes 10 seconds of truth can change everything. But sometimes even truth can't bring back what was lost. If this story moved you, if it made you think about trust and power and the thousand small ways people can hurt each other behind closed doors, leave a comment below. Tell us about a time when you saw through someone's lies, or when you wish you had. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the hidden truth behind human behavior, the good, the bad, and the devastating. Hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to understand that when our instincts tell us something is wrong, we should listen. Because sometimes those instincts are the only thing standing between us and people who mean us harm.